Good morning, afternoon, and evening, and greetings to everyone joining us from the International Sports and Society Conference. My name is Dr. Jamila Johnson, and I am a lecturer and internship coordinator with the PGA Golf Management Program in the Department of Hospitality and Tourism Management at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. I am joined on this research by my colleague, Dr. Christopher Prosser from the Department of Kinesiology. Today, I want to to you about a troubling trend that has persisted in American collegiate athletics for the last 5 decades, and about a framework my research proposes to address it. The presentation is titled Bench Before They Begin: A Systematic Exclusion and the Decline of Women Coaches in NCAA Division I Athletics. Let us begin with the data because the numbers are striking. In 1972, when Title IX was enacted in the United States, approximately 90% of women's collegiate sports teams were coached by women. Today, that figure stands at just 43.2% and has been declining consistently. Think about that. A law designed to protect gender equity in education has coincided with a 50-year erosion of women's presence in one of the most visible leadership roles in collegiate sports. This is not a pipeline problem. The decline is not explained by a lack of qualified women. It is the research that argues the result of a deeply entrenched institutional biases that operate through the very succession planning processes that are designed to help future leaders. The underrepresentation of women in Division I coaching position represents what I can call a critical organizational failure, one that undermines the gender equity principle that American higher education claims to uphold. To understand how we arrived here, we must look back. Before Title IX, women athletics in the United States were governed by the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, the AIAW, an organization founded and operated by women. Women held nearly all coaching and administrative positions. Title IX changed the governance structure of these women's athletics and paradoxically began the decline. As men athletic departments absorbed women's programs, the leadership roles that women had built and occupied were steadily transferred to men. 50 years of enforcement has not reversed this trend, revealing that the problem is structural, not individual. It's not that women are choosing not to coach. They are being systematically excluded from pathways to coaching leadership. Burton's 2015 foundational work described this as a web of constraints operating simultaneously at individual, interpersonal, organizational, and societal levels. No single barrier tells the full story. It is their intersection that creates the exclusion. Let me walk you through those four levels of barriers in a more detail. At the individual level, women coaches internalize gender expectations about who belongs in leadership. Imposter syndrome, pressures to balance family and career, burdens that are disproportionately placed on women shape their decisions about pursuing and staying in coaching. At the interpersonal level, the informal networks through which coaching opportunities are shared, the good old boy clubs, systematically exclude women. Advancement in this field relies heavily on sponsorships, and sponsors tend to advocate for people who look like them. Organizationally, succession pipelines are opaque. There are no transparent criteria for advancement, no structural accountability for gender equity, and no family friendly policies that acknowledge the realities of women's lives. And at the societal level, sports leadership is culturally coded as masculine. Media undercoverage of women's athletic achievements and reinforces that the assumption that women are not natural leaders in this space. This web of constraints operates on women coaches before they even apply for a position, hence the title, Benched Before They Begin. While scholars have thoroughly documented the fact of underrepresentation, three critical gaps remain in the literature. First, although succession planning is central to leadership development, almost no research examines how succession planning processes specifically contribute to the exclusion of women in athletic leadership. That is the gap that this study directly addresses. Second, mentorship is recognized as important, but the literature does not examine how formal succession systems can be designed to institutionalize equitable access to mentorship and sponsorship rather than just leaving it to chance. Third, the most research, thirdly, most research treats women coaches as a monolithic group. It does not adequately account for how race compounds these barriers, how Black women, Latinas, and other women of color navigate not one, but multiple intersecting systems of bias simultaneously. To address these gaps, this study employed a sequential exploratory multi method design following the framework developed by Cresswell and Piano Clark. This design was chosen specifically because gender equity in collegiate athletics operates across multiple levels simultaneously: individual, interpersonal, organizational, and societal. No single method can capture that completely. The study unfolded in three phases. Phase one, a systematic review of 52 peer reviewed studies examining women's representation in athletic coaching and administration. Phase two, a semi structured interview with 11 current and former NCAA Division I women head coaches. Phase three, an ethnographic observation within athletic departments to examine organizational culture and practices firsthand. Together, these three phases allow this research to move from documenting what is happening to understanding why to building a framework for what must change. The 11 coaches who participated in this study were recruited through professional coaching networks and snowball sampling, each participant referring others from their network. Coaches represented five sports: basketball, track and field, golf, softball, and tennis. They ranged from early career coaches with fewer than 5 years of experience to veterans with more than 16 years. Participants came from large public research universities, small private colleges, and mid sized regional institutions spread across five geographic regions of the United States. Importantly, the group reflected meaningful racial and ethnic diversity, including three African American coaches, one Latina coach, whose experiences gave particular depth to the findings on intersexuality. Across the systematic review, interviews, and observations, five major findings emerged. First, women coaches face systematic credibility challenges. Regardless of their qualifications or their experience, their competence is questioned in ways that their male counterparts are not. This is not an occasional bias, it is institutionalized. Second, succession planning in athletic departments operates through informal networks that systematically exclude women. Advancement conversations happen behind closed doors between people who already share relationships of trust. Relationships women are rarely included in. Third, women of color face compounded discrimination. They must simultaneously navigate racial and gender bias, requiring enormous additional cognitive and emotional labor just to remain in the profession. Fourth, mentorship gaps are significant. Women coaches lack not just mentors, but sponsors and people with institutional power who actively advocate for their advancement. Fifth, women adapt to masculine leadership norms to survive within athletic department cultures. This cultural conformity pressure forces women to perform a version of leadership that is not their own, at significant personal costs and long term instability. These findings led to the central contribution of this research, the Coach Advancement Retention Framework, CARF. CARF is an analytical tool developed through this study to integrate the three established bodies of theory: gender role, succession, and mentorship. Gender role theory explains how societal norms about gender distort the evaluations of women leadership's competence, making it appear that women are less qualified when in fact they are being measured against a masculine standard. Succession theory, applied through an equity lens, reframes the succession planning not as a neutral administrative process, but as an intervention point, a place where institutions can actively counteract structural exclusion. Mentorship theory, integrated into succession planning, positions formal sponsorship and mentorship not as an optional professional courtesy, but as structural requirements embedded in the system rather than left to an informal chance. CARF operates across all four levels: individual, interpersonal, organizational, and societal. It provides athletic departments with a systematic, evidence based tool to assess their current gender equity practices and identify precisely where and how to intervene. A framework is only as valuable as its application. So, what does CARF look like in practice? At the institutional level, athletic departments should conduct annual gender equity audits of their succession pipelines, mandate diverse hiring panels, and publish transparent criteria for advancement. At the programmatic level, create formal mentorship and sponsorship programs that connect women coaches with advocates who have institutional power. Offer leadership development training, build across cross institutional peer networks so women coaches are not isolated within their departments. At the cultural level, redefine leadership competency frameworks to include collaborative and relational leadership styles, styles that research consistently shows women coaches bring to their programs. Address the masculine default and celebrate women's coaching success stories publicly. At the policy level, expand Title IX compliance, monitoring to include coaching pipelines, require athletic departments to report succession planning demographics, support paid parental leave, and family responsive policies. None of these interventions are radical. These are straightforward organizational equity practices, the kind that other sectors have implemented successfully. The athletic world simply has not demanded them. I want to close with the ultimate conclusion of this research. Gender equity in coaching leadership is both necessary and achievable. The CARF framework gives athletic departments a systematic, evidence based tool to turn that aspiration into action. It bridges the academic scholarship and practical implementation because what the literature describes, organizations must actually change. Succession planning, when intentionally redesigned, can be a lever for inclusion rather than a mechanism for exclusion. The choice is structural, not inevitable. Future research could examine how CARF implementation performs across different institutional environments as the broader landscape of collegiate athletics continues to evolve. But perhaps most importantly, structural change requires collective will. Athletic directors, conference offices, the NCAA, faculty, researchers, and coaches themselves must work together to dismantle the systems this research has made visible. Women coaches have been benched before they began for 50 years. It is time to change the game. Thank you for your attention and participation.